O' 'na lot o blant yn y stryd, a ddoth 'na deulu o evacuees o Lundan i fyw yn un o'r tai, ac oeddan ni gyd yn chwarae fyny yn y chwaral lle toddan ni ddim i fod i chwarae.
We played a great deal in the hoppers of the disused quarry hoppers, and Ivor Davies, the local archaeologist, had used one of the buildings there to build his model of the Carneddau, and we as children used to help him. Well, we thought we were helping, and we would stick pieces of sponge onto bits of wood, and they would be the trees and things.
A dwi'n cofio dynion yn mynd i fyny i'r chwaral a dod lawr yn y twllwch ac yn ei fel rhyw fath o dan yn ei dilo i dan y safari lawr.
The quarry originally was owned privately by the Derbyshire family. They were gentry, really. I can remember when I was a kid, Mr Derbyshire on a horse used to ride past our house, you know, and maybe his grandchildren on horses, you know. You know, we used to sit there with our mouths open watching, you know. In the days of the quarry, when the quarry was full, there were so many men with the same name, so they had to give them nicknames.
How they got their names were interesting. There's one chap who had worked on the railway all his life, and his wife was quite pleased that he went to work in a uniform. He was a porter or something, and she enjoyed polishing his buttons every morning for going to work and smartening himself up, collar and tie. He told us more money to be had in the quarry, so he said, I've got to work at the quarry. His wife was furious. Don't you come back with a nickname. I'll be careful, he said. Weeks he'd been there and nothing happened. Then one day, one of the men said, I'm giving Fred a nickname there. And he said proudly, you'll never catch me. Byth Dalfi. And that was his nickname for his life. Byth Dalfi. You'll never catch me.
There was one fella, and he used to help the blacksmith, and he was called Will Pick. And I thought it was because he worked with a pick. And I said to the blacksmith one day, I knew, why do they call him Will Pick? And he said to me, don't you know? Well, no, I said, I don't. He says, he's always bloody picking his nose, he said. They gave them because that's how they were recognised, because there were so many called John Davies, John Roberts, John Jones. There were so many of them.
If you were lucky enough to pass the scholarship, as we called it, in the 1920s and 30s and before, you went to either Friars School in Bangor or to John Bright, Llandudno, but mainly Friars School. And when you came from there, you wanted a white-collar job. There weren't many white-collar jobs in this area at that time. There weren't huge banks of offices, you know, as you do in cities. So the nearest job to a white-collar job was to work in the quarry offices in below the quarry. And it's called the Office of Awr, the big office. And it was quite an achievement to be employed there. You went to work in a suit, right, collar and tie. Whereas my grandfather went in a blue, thick shirt, covered in dust by the time he came home.
I was only 15 and I worked in the quarry office. And there was a few hundred men working in the quarry then. And on Fridays, I and somebody else would go around with the wages. And when you think back, there was no, I was only 15, 16. There was no security. And I'd have a box, a wooden box like that. and all the cash, all the wages were in cash. And I'd go all over the quarry, dishing the wages out.
If you worked in the quarry office, you'd have made it. But not really, you hadn't, because my grandfather came home with more money than they did, because he worked such long hours. He was coming home with sometimes up to £8 or £9 a week, which was a fortune in the 1930s and 40s. Whereas the others would be about £3, £4 a week as a white-collar worker. He didn't achieve a good wage, as you might do today with a computer, etc. Your achievement was getting your hands dirty. And my grandfather had come home filthy, covered in oil, covered in dust. And I can see my grandmother now in the backyard with a huge tub, stuncho we called it, cleaning his filthy clothes and water coming out black.
You know, you went, whether it was raining, snowing or what, didn't make any difference. And some of the men, they would have gone to work with, they'd put sacks over them, wrap sacks around their legs to keep their trousers dry, and sacks over their shoulders to protect themselves. And they worked like that, because if they didn't work, they didn't make any money. And at one time, I worked in an office halfway up the quarry. And, you know, we had electric fires there, things like that. You know, they were always on, you know. But the men working outside, they didn't. The conditions they worked in was very hard, you know, very hard.
My grandfather was a quarryman in Penmaenmawr, repairing wagons, etc. in the quarry. The wagons were the main transport for carrying stone down from the upper parts of the quarry, for the crushing plants, down to the road for lorries, down to the jetties for the sea transport. They were also a means of taking men to work, because everybody worked at least 1,000 feet above sea level. So in the morning you get men running to jump on the back of a wagon which was being pulled up empty, while a full wagon came down, drawing the other one up, you see. So one morning, he was a bit late for work. He didn't like travelling on the back of a wagon. It was just a little step we could jump on and held on for dear life. And as he ran for the wagon, two men got there before him. One of them turned around and, "Hard luck, Will. Next time, Will," you know. And that the rope pulling the wagon up snapped. And I think I'm right in saying those two men were killed or badly injured. And it could have been my grandfather. And from that day on, that's the last time I went up in a quarry wagon. That finished him. He preferred to get up earlier and walk up the zigzag the paths which took him to his place of work.